Welcome to Gospel Lessons. I'm Kevin Prince. Today is part 4 in a series on Second Coming prophecies. Joining me is Bruce Porter, a renowned scholar with degrees in ancient Near Eastern and Middle East studies, specializing in Semitic languages and religious history. Bruce has authored over 16 books and is well known for his research on the Pearl of Great Price. I first met him on a life-changing tour in 2018, which inspired this Gospel Lessons YouTube channel. Now, if you've never traveled with Bruce, I highly recommend it. He frequently speaks and guides on LDS-based cruises with Go and Do Travel. These cruises offer opportunities to connect with like-minded members and learn from speakers like Bruce. I'll be joining the Momentum 2026 cruise with him, and if you're interested, use promo code PRINCE for $100 off. All proceeds from Gospel Lessons, including sponsorships, go to charity. Christ appears at the temple in Zion, and Christ appears at Adam-ondi-Ahman. These things, real prophecies, not yet happened?
Well, we know he comes to the Mount of Olives. We know he's going to come to Adam-ondi-Ahman. And, you know, we can talk about, well, is he going to appear at the temple in Independence? He can do, as he appeared at the Salt Lake Temple or any other modern temple. He can do. Did he appear at the temple in Bountiful? Now, in Jerusalem, he was never in the temple that we know of. In Bountiful,
right?
Yeah, he was never there. He was never in the temple. In Bountiful, he wouldn't have been in that temple either. He appears on the outside of that temple. But we have records of prophets who said they've seen Christ in different temples, Salt Lake as well as others. Can he appear there? Yes, he can appear there. If he appears at a temple in Jackson County or Independence, if there's an appearance there, it's not a public appearance. We may interpret it that he's appearing outside as a public appearance. I get the impression that just from statements made by different people that the appearance at Adam-ondi-Ahman is more public than it is just to a single small group of people like it might be in the temple. And when does that take place? You know, people say, well, that takes place at the beginning of the millennium. Well, if you're going to talk about a millennium, in my opinion, you have to begin talking about, you got to interpret when the millennium begins. If we use the Book of Mormon as a pattern of the last days, and I think it is, I really think if you want to know the events of the last days and how they're going to transpire, I think we need to look at the Book of Mormon that leads up to, leading up to that time of Christ. You have a political collapse, you have an economic collapse, Christianity's outlawed, Samuel and Ammonites prophesying of the signs that are going to come. Then you see signs in the heavens of not just the birth of Christ before, but you see the signs in the heavens of the death of Christ, the earthquakes that come, the destruction that takes place before Christ even shows up, the voice that comes a year before he shows up, because we know the destructions came at the end of year or at the beginning of the year, and Christ comes at the end of the year of the next year, the end of that year. So it's a year later before he comes. And then he begins teaching. And so we see all of these events, and these are all prophesied for in some way of the events of the last days during the second coming. So when does millennium begin? Does it begin with the destruction, the earthquakes? Does it begin with a political collapse? Does it begin when he sets foot on the Mount of Olives? Does it begin when he's in the, Adam-ondi-Ahman? When does the millennium actually begin? Does it begin when everyone's converted? Because everyone will eventually, at least the understanding that we have, is everyone will eventually be converted during that millennium. And then there's a little season, just as there was at the end of 4th Nephi and on. Satan is loose for a little season, and so when does the millennium actually begin? So that defining that time period is very difficult. Now, most people say it's when Christ comes, and that's basically what I see. I know there's a whole group of members of the church that believe that the millennium began with Joseph Smith, and we're in the process of converting the world right now.
Right. No, I agree with when he comes, that's when the millennium starts. When he touches his foot on the Mount of Olives, my personal belief is that's when the millennium starts. But last few things here, because we talked about that. Well, there's the prophecy of the islands fleeing. And then in section 133, the continents coming together, at which, I mean, it kind of says that pretty clearly, but people have interpreted that different ways. Those two things related and real prophecies before?
I think they're real prophecies because they're connected back. It goes back to the time of Enoch, when the great destructions and cataclysmic events start taking place at the time of Enoch, and running from Enoch down till the time of Peleg. Then it says the earth was divided in the days of Peleg. I don't think it divided overnight or during his lifetime. I think it was in a process of dividing. And then at the time of Peleg, it just became too far to get from one place to the other place. So, and then it says not only in our Doctrine and Covenants, but it also says it in the book of Revelation that it will come back again. It's going to come back as it was before the days of Peleg. So we're going to see this, if you want to call it Pangea or whatever word you want to call it. The question is, how and why does that start? Now, it's the assumption with many geologists that accept the asteroid impact theory that the separation of the beginning of plate tectonics took place because of asteroid impacts. And that began the process of the plate tectonics that began forcing the plates apart, which could be the reason they come back together again, or some type of cataclysmic events that come back, that cause this to come back. Now, I think it is a prophecy, and that may be the prophecy that leads up to or happens during that 1,000 years, or even perhaps even after that 1,000 years. But it appears that it's going to come back because it says it will, as it was in the days of Peleg, before the days of Peleg.
Yeah, because it says that it will happen. It doesn't mean that it happens overnight. It happens tomorrow, but it could mean that the beginning of it or the event that happens, let's imagine it's an asteroid strike, it's Wormwood. If that were the case, that could begin the process of them coming back together. It's not saying it has to all be back together prior to the second coming, but that it start, I think. Last three. Half hour of silence, the spring of water from coming forth from the Jerusalem temple, and the healing of the Dead Sea.
Silence in the heavens for half an hour. You know, what's a half an hour? In God's time, that's about 20 years. If you look at one day as 1,000 years, that's about 20 years halftime. But what's silence in the heaven? What does it mean? Could it be that communications are gone? Could it be that there's no communications of general conference to the rest of the world? Is there no communications? And a lot of people think that that's what, or a lot of people I know that I've talked to about it kind of think that may be the explanation of it, that we're looking at a lack of communications for a number of years, and that could happen very quickly if with a EMP or something like that, electromagnetic pulse. That could happen where there's no communications around the world for an extended period of time. So is that the silence in the heaven? It's a good question what that silence means. Is there no revelation that's taking place? Is the church just standing stagnant for 20 years? Or
is it a real prophecy before the second coming? And has it happened? I don't think it's happened yet.
I don't either. I think it's a real prophecy because it's talked about in many different of our books of our standard works. It's talked about too often to be just something in passing. Just like the sun, moon, and stars is talked about in every single one of our standard works. And so you've got to begin taking it seriously when it shows up that much. And so I think silence in the heaven, if it were just 30 minutes, no one would know.
Nobody would care.
Yeah, exactly. No one would know, and no one would care. So you know, so it could be, and that may just mean an extended period of time. You know, silence in the heavens for a space of half an hour. Is that God's half an hour? Is that our half an hour? So, but I think it's real. I think there's something that's going to stop the communication or the revelation that we get as regular members of the church from the brethren. So.
Interesting. And then the spring of water from the temple and the healing of the Dead Sea, which I've always associated, well, those are associated in scripture as one leading to the other, it sounds like.
The spring of water, always in a temple, some type of temple complex, so water is always connected to the temple. It doesn't matter what temple you go to, ancient, modern, our Latter-day Saint temples, or even ancient temples around the world in different cultures and different religions. Almost all temples have to be associated with the water because all temples represent the creation, and water is connected to that creation. In our temples, it's usually a spring. For example, St. George, Manti have springs underneath their temples. Underneath the temples there, they built them on springs. Salt Lake has a stream running underneath it, or underground there. A lot of them will have fountains or pools or reflecting pools that reflect the temple in the other world. So water is generally associated with it. And then it's supposed to come out from under the altar, because the altar, see, this pattern is in the creation epics that we have, and our creation accounts that we have. In the center of the garden, there was a tree of life. And from underneath that tree of life, there was a spring of water that divided into 4 heads and go to the 4 corners of the world, north, south, east, and west, which waters the whole world. So the waters of life come out from the tree of life, and the altar represents that primordial mound on which grew the tree of life. And so it comes out from under the altar at the temple in Jerusalem, and part of it goes towards the former sea and part of it towards the hinder sea. Part of it goes towards the Mediterranean, and the other part towards the Dead Sea. And it says eventually heals the Dead Sea. Now, to heal the Dead Sea is going to require an earthquake also that's going to raise that valley. Jerusalem is approximately 2,400 feet above sea level. The Dead Sea, Jericho, close to the Dead Sea, is about 1,300 feet below sea level. The surface of the Dead Sea is about 1,300 feet below sea level. So that's 4,700 feet in difference. It's almost more than 3/4 of a mile difference between Jerusalem and the Dead Sea in a 16-mile range. Now, if you fill that up, if you heal that means the water has to be running into an ocean somewhere. To heal that would take such a large amount. There'd be so many destruction of cities and people. Even the Sea of Galilee, which is in that Jordan, they call it the Jordan Rift, that the Dead Sea is in. The Sea of Galilee is 600 feet. The surface of the Sea of Galilee is 600 feet below sea level. So if you're going to fill that without that rift raising, or at least becoming higher because of an earthquake, then everything from the southern end of the Dead Sea all the way to Galilee would be underwater. All of the Sea of Galilee, Tiberias, Capernaum, Beit Shan, all of those cities would be underwater. So I think, as it talks about in the last days, mountains will be made low and valleys will be exalted, made high. And I think that valley can go high, and then you can have a healing of the Dead Sea. Now, if you want to look at it in a prophetic type of way, or a example, or a symbol, Israel right now is they're discussing, and they've been working on it for a number of years, is if they could bring water into the Dead Sea area from the Gulf of Aqaba, which is sea level. Now, if you take 1,300 feet below sea level and bring water in, once you got it started, it's going to siphon out of the ocean. It's going to siphon the ocean into that Jordan Rift Valley, and they just have to control that siphoning. So they're already talking about keeping the water in the Dead Sea, which would begin that process of healing. But the prophecy is that the spring will come out from under the altar of the temple. So I think there's water that's going to do it. That's just typical within that those traditions and those prophecies.
But real prophecies haven't yet happened.
Yeah, haven't yet happened.
Awesome. Did I miss any prophecies that you can think of that are last days prophecies before the coming of Christ that we haven't discussed here?
Well, I'm sure there is. I can't think of any offhand, but I'm sure there
are too.
Number out there.
I'm sure I'll get lots of comments like, you forgot this one, you forgot that one.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, do it. Well, this has been great, Bruce. This has been super helpful. I can't believe you can do this off the top of your head. That's one of the reasons I love doing this. But thank you so much for joining us on this episode around Signs of the Times, the Second Coming events. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
This concludes this series on Second Coming Last Days prophecies. Remember to subscribe so future episodes are easier to find. Thanks for watching.